Hi guys.
Hey.
I hope I I hope you guys are all good, considering it's the weekend now as well. It's been a quite stressful week for me personally. How about you guys?
Stress at work for sure, but other than that, good.
Yeah. Um, so this is the first Voice It with SLYO session, and we decided to kickstart it off with the Black Lives Matter movement. And the, the aim of this project is to talk about issues that the Lankan community usually considers as taboo. And racism is actually one of them. We, just like the British, we don't really like to explore that topic. And the Black Lives Matter movement protest in Sri Lanka has actually been about exploring how we treat our own minorities. Um, so I'm joined here today by Hasan. I've known him for quite a long time.
Mm.
And I think some of us here actually know him too. And rather than me introducing you, would you like to say a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, I always find that tricky one. So I'm Mo. What can I say? So at the moment, I'm justice, working on kind of making the justice system much more accessible to all groups of people, digitizing it, transforming it. But then also I've done some work with the Victims and Witness Policy Unit, which is looking at the funding crisis for rape crisis centers, for refugees, for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. Also working on some research around county lines. So using kids to traffic drugs across borders effectively. Before then, I was in Lebanon working on the Syrian refugee crisis. I was offered a full-time job out there. Didn't take it because of the political situation. And before that, I was kind of bouncing around in corporate law and trying to find myself. And I met Chini doing law and politics at Sussex.
We both met we got to know each other through Model UN, actually.
We model UN, yeah. That in itself that's a whole other video chat. Yeah, I mean, I think I can piece together more of myself. I kind of describe myself through the lens of my career, but I think as we kind of delve into race and identity and how I view myself, do I view myself as the Sudanese person? Do I view myself as a Muslim? Do I view myself as a black person? Do I now view myself as breaking into that middle class because of where I'm working and how I'm dressed and how I'm speaking? Or am I still the same guy that was wearing only hoodies, only tracksuits, only basketball shoes? We can break into that. So that's a bit about me.
He also has his own podcast and he's a blogger as well. Do you want to tell people what it's called?
Oh yeah, okay. Thank you for the plug. So it feels less shameless now, I will say that. Yeah, so you may have seen me so I have a podcast called Let's Talk with Mo Hasan, and effectively I started it last year because I wanted to capture the stories of people, a diverse group of people, and it's almost like a time capsule for good conversations. And this hit me hardest when I have a friend, actually also Sri Lankan, called Dikshika, that was really close to me, and she unfortunately passed away earlier this year. But that podcast episode that we have together, kind of documenting her life and going through her journey as a refugee to this country and learning English and kind of becoming more politically active is so important to me. So that's the podcast. And you can probably find a bit more about me at mohasan.net. But again, we can go into all of that later.
Just want to let you know, Natalie just joined us. I'm very excited.
Good. Natalie, turn on your camera if you can. Actually, do what you like. It's good to see you though.
How do I turn on my?
Yes!
So again, I know Natalie through. Oh, she's gone.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm just doing like my morning face routine, but I'm
That's all right.
still here.
So we both know Natalie through uni as well, and she's. Do you want to explain a bit about what you do? Because you've done so much work in domestic violence and.
Yeah, I do a lot. So at the moment, I'm a human rights paralegal. I've studied the LPC part-time, trying to qualify as a lawyer. I did work in domestic violence for about 8 months. I published my own paper. I did a lecture at the BPP University. And then I decided that, I love not like domestic violence. I love working in the sector of domestic violence, but I wanted it to be a bit bigger. I wanted to work not just on domestic violence, but on like cases of brutality in general. So I work in civil liberties and human rights at the moment, which is basically all focused on inquests. So that's like death in custody, police brutality, prison brutality, equality claims, human rights claims, misfeasance in public office, malicious prosecution, false imprisonment, all of that.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Just for people who don't know what the Sri Lankan Youth Organisation is, I'm wondering whether Shani or Aruni would want to explain what we are about.
Aruniaki, I'll let you go with that.
I don't know whether Aruniaki's here. What, she's here?
Oh my God, hello. Hi, sorry. Hey you guys, so it's 3 a.m. here. I'm like looking for something. I'm like, should I turn the video on?
If you want, it's up to you.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second, okay?
Yeah.
Oh my God, things I do for you guys.
Sorry guys, I just like.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So, yes, my name is Aruni. I'm the founder of SLYO.
Nice.
First of all, thank you so much. I think this is something that we needed in our community.
Right.
Just as Shani talked about, just in USA. Hold on 1 second, my puppy just came in. Hold on.
Sorry guys, it's very bad.
Why are you up so early? Put me up. So I think this is one of those topics that we should talk about. Just here in LA in general, I feel that a lot of Sri Lankans do not want to talk about it. And we get the same reaction as how you all see it there as well. So
yeah,
I'm pretty excited for this. I think it's great for us to start about these uncomfortable topics. So
yeah, for sure.
This year's been pretty ew. It's like hell, and it's affected everyone personally in one way or another.
Yeah.
And so I want to know, Mo, like, how do you feel with everything that's happened with George Floyd, especially being you're a black man, especially being a black man? How do you feel about it with everything that's happened and the BLM protests as well? How are you feeling? How do you feel?
I think, okay, well, firstly, it's interesting when people speak about George Floyd because it's not about just George Floyd. It's something that's been going on for a very, very, very long time. I've lost count of the number of sort of police shootings, knees on the neck, lynchings that I've read about, that I've seen. And there's something really almost scarring about the whole George Floyd experience. When you see someone put their knee on another man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and it's so public. It's on Instagram, it's everywhere. It does
execution. It's almost like an execution.
It is an execution. It is an execution. I think what's been, this year has been difficult for me for a variety of personal reasons, losing friends and loved ones. But within such a short space, within the first 6 months. But I think it's been compounded by the fact that you bring up something like George Floyd, there shouldn't be a but for some reason there is. When you raise the issue of George Floyd, people feel the need to say, but he had a criminal record, but he produced a counterfeit note, but he did this, but he did that. And I think it's that almost enrages me more than the act itself. I think 2020 has been interesting because it's almost like a lot of people have started to wake up. Like, oh, this police brutality thing, it's a thing. Oh, okay, there's this thing called structural racism. Oh, this happens in the UK too. I don't think we've quite got there yet, but hopefully we will.
Yeah.
So it's been a bit of an overwhelming experience because it's definitely challenged some of my own friendships. Like on the whole, I'm lucky to have friends that are like open to being challenged and generally read up on these sorts of things. But it's a strange place. It's been a roller coaster of emotions. Yeah. It's been one of kind of, in some ways, deep disappointment. Like, yes, in some ways I am hopeful. I'm glad to see, people coming together. But it just, when you see kind of subtle racism in your own circles, or when you see an unwillingness, or you see a willful ignorance amongst your own friends, and you're a minority in that space, it's challenging. And then you add lockdown to it, and then you add everything else to it. It's been difficult. It's been difficult. That's all I can really say. It's been a roller coaster.
I personally almost felt like everyone was kind of saying because he had a criminal record, it was okay. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, this makes me so angry more than the video itself, because we're talking about the sanctity of life. We're talking about dignity. We're talking about justice. We're talking about proportionality, right? So if, what's his name? Dylan Rufus, or whatever his name is, goes into Charleston and shoots 9 black people. Forget they're black even. He just shoots 9 people while they're praying, and he's handcuffed and put in a bulletproof vest, and he's slowly taken out. Or there was that other famous case of, I forgot his name, but he was found to be, he raped a woman while she was unconscious in an alley, and he was let go because the judge said he had a bright future.
Oh my God, I know. I don't know the case. I know the case you're talking about, but I don't know the name.
I forgot the name.
He was in like college or something, right?
I think his name was Brock Turner.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it. So already you're seeing how this discussion plays out. So when people, firstly, if we just even extinguish race, which you can't, and I don't want to, but let's just we do it for the sake of argument. Why are those two? Why is him having a criminal record, somehow a justification for that level of treatment, that level of disregard for the law, that level of just humanity? The fact that someone's saying, I can't breathe. Even if you believe in the death penalty, for what? Forging a note.
It's ridiculous.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And it infuriates me that people's minds jump to that place.
Yeah.
If you're any civilized society, even in a society where you do have the death penalty, where you have stoning, there is a process. The fact that you can stand by and see another man suffocated for almost 9 minutes, a father, a member of the community, that's crazy. Have we become that disconnected from the value of human life, regardless of what he did? How is that your knee-jerk reaction? Yeah. I bet you if that was a sibling, a parent, a cousin, a friend, that would not be your reaction.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say, oh yeah, but he committed a crime. That's what's so enraging. And I think there's this kind of disregard. Quite frankly, black life is cheap. It's cheap in the US and it's cheap in this country. That's straight up. That is straight up. I can tell you on my road, if an individual who's white is assaulted, the police presence is triple, quadruple it would be than if a black or Asian individual was stabbed or assaulted. But we'll get into that later.
Yeah, racism in the UK is very messy, and like you said, always seen as cheap lives, and we saw that with Grenfell Towers.
Yeah, that's where race and class intersect, and we can talk about that later as well.
So not a lot of people actually know about the Black Lives Matter movement. They know it exists, they know it stands for Black Lives, but they don't really know the roots of the organization and the aims of it, because it's more than just Black lives and police brutality, because there's other issues that they fight for, such as social housing and class issues. So do you mind telling people the roots and the aims of the movement and when it started?
Yeah, so I'm super careful when I say the roots and the movements, because people are going to say, okay, well, it started from a tweet from an activist right before the Ferguson riots, right before the fatal shooting of Michael Brown. But I'm always reluctant, because in my mind, the Black Lives Matter movement started way before that, and so how do I put this
even with like Rodney King. Like,
there you go.
Yeah.
Rodney King and the LA riots,
and the
right?
LA riots, like way before.
So that's the thing, and I doubt it's the first time someone has actually said Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I'm always a bit reluctant, because I think what people do, and Natalie, feel free to jump in on this, is they want to attribute it to a moment. They want to give the movement a few owners, so then they can go and discredit them.
Yeah.
They can
Sorry.
No, go for it.
So I kind of feel like, so I wrote my dissertation on Ferguson in third year and like the Black Lives Matter movement. And I had an interesting conversation with my tutor at the time about like who coined the term Black Lives Matter. And I feel like the term Black Lives Matter has always existed. Its definition has just evolved and become this thing, you know? I feel like before Black Lives Matter, the baby, I say baby, not as in baby, but like the infant of that term was the civil rights movement and just like civil rights, you know? And I feel like that's just like, we have civil rights now. So supposedly. So now it's become less of like civil rights and more like, okay, I actually want to exist in a society where I'm not persecuted by the color of my skin, but like we have like equality laws now, whether they work or not, it's different, like altogether, you know? So, yeah, I kind of agree with Mo. Like, I'm really like hesitant to say like, yeah, Black Lives Matter started from a tweet from a particular activist, because I feel like by saying that, it kind of just like refutes all of the, I wouldn't say like refutes per se, but like Rodney King, like Elijah Kane, like all these people that have like died way before Black Lives Matter was a thing, like they need to be encompassed into that as well, you know? I don't want Black Lives Matter to be a thing that started in 2014 because Michael Brown died. No, I think that is like, Mo's right in a sense of like, it's always been there, but it's just like, the way it's been approached or named or whatever has just changed. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Because it's picked up. It's a bit like when people say the George Floyd incident. I'm like, oh,
no, like it's not unique.
Structural racism.
Yeah, like it's not unique. Like it's been just so exhausting. For me personally, I found this whole thing that's been happening with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. Personally, I found it quite exhausting. Only because there's something like that's like very traumatic about seeing somebody that looks like you getting killed so brutally. Like that, I look at George Floyd, I look at Elijah Kane, I look at Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, I see my older brother, I see my cousins, I see men that like look like my people. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, when I saw the video, I had to turn my laptop off and just hop off Instagram, hop off Twitter. I had to just delete, I had to just stop, because it's like, there's just something really insidious about seeing people that look like you. Like, that's something that I don't think my white counterparts really understand. Because when we were having discussions about it, I was like, when you see somebody that looks like you, and this happens to them, then you can come and tell me how that, like, you can't tell me anything basically, because like, you don't have to experience watching this all the time.
And it's not just like a one-time thing. It's
not a one-time thing, you know,
over and over.
Yeah, so it's just like, I personally found it exhausting, because then like I had an upheaval of white people just messaging me, being like, what do I do? I'm not your teacher. Like, this is another thing.
It's not our job to teach, basically.
I know. I said I had a lot to say, and girl, I'm gonna
let it rip, Natalie.
I just feel like a lot of all of this has been happening, and you know, a lot of with good intentions. A lot of my white friends have been messaging me, being like, well, what can I do? But it's like, that just falls into the whole rhetoric of like, Black people having to be your teacher. Why do I have to teach you? I don't have to teach you how not to be racist, mate. Like, I really don't. Like, I just found the whole thing like great in some aspects, but like traumatic, exhausting, even kind of polarizing. Like,
Yeah.
it's just it's exactly as Mo said. Like in my workplace, I'm trying to leave because I was exceptionally disappointed with how the directors like responded to this situation. My team responded to it perfectly. Like the team that I work in, like the whole police brutality team, like perfect response. I didn't even have to say anything. My boss, she wrote like a big ass article, posted it on the website. It was beautiful. But it's just like, I find like almost like now I log into Facebook and it's polarizing in the sense of like somebody will be like making these comparisons, like,
Yeah.
like suddenly the conversation of like blackface comes up and all of these things has come up, just like microaggressions in general, and people will be like, oh, you know, like it's not all about race and all of this, and it's just, oh my God, man.
That's the thing. I think people it's refocused the conversation around privilege, and that's annoying a lot of people. And I said to her face, I said, you're uncomfortable, imagine how we feel. Secondly, every time your discomfort kicks in, that's your privilege kicking in.
Like,
that's your privilege kicking in. And that's for everything, by the way. That's for everything.
Yeah.
So if I'm watching I May Destroy You, right, with a group of black friends, and then there's a scene between two men having sex that happen to be black, and some of my black friends are uncomfortable, like, oh, fam, switch that off, change the channel.
Yeah, which happens with my black friends too. I'm like,
right, that's their privilege kicking in. Yeah, that's their privilege kicking in too. So it's interesting when, and you know what, look, it's when it comes to comedy and when it comes to films, when it comes to all these things, it's not like we're furiously running back and saying, oh, that film with Robert Downey Jr., take off the blackface, or that
you're talking about Tropic Thunder.
That's it. Take it off. We're not saying that at the moment. All we're saying is, can we have some basic recourse to justice?
Thank you.
You know what I mean?
How I want to get, like, my main intake, like, that I want to, like, something that I want to learn today is, like, how has, like, the Sri Lankan community kind of reacted to this in general? Because I have got a lot of Sri Lankan friends.
So basically, on a personal level, like, we have known each other for a very long time. Like, I've known Mo for a long time and I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
But for some reason, especially being both coming from minorities, we've never touched on racism.
Yeah.
Never had that conversation at all. And like you said, like, even with my workplace, we haven't done anything at all. And I feel like we're failing our black colleagues.
Absolutely.
And like, we've touched on relationships, mental health, careers, grief, but never racism.
That's so bizarre to me.
It's so
all of that amalgamates into racism, like mental health, all of like grief, all of that. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to interrupt you, but continue.
So for me, the movement has a special place, and it hit a nerve.
Yeah.
Because when we started promoting the event, and we got backlash, like, I posted it on like a page, and it was a full-blown argument, and it was just not nice. And
what kind of backlash?
The main comments we got was, stop giving it into lefty politics, stop embarrassing the Lankan community abroad, and all lives matter.
Yeah.
And that was the same with the US as well.
What was that lady saying? Sorry, I don't actually know your name. I really apologize.
That's Aruni.
Hi, Aruni. Hi, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
What was you going to say? Sorry?
I'm sorry?
No, I heard Aruni say something, and then, like, I didn't hear what she said.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. So I think here in USA it's the same. It's just all life matters pop up. It's like it was a really struggle at the beginning to say no, Black Lives Matters. And it's like constant examples of this is why it is, this is why. I felt like I had to educate I live here in LA. our community just saying, this is the reason Black Lives Matter. We are here in LA because of Black Lives Matter. It's just the fact that constant education, and I feel like we still have the same rotation. And I think people just, in our community, they just gave up. They just don't know what to do, because within our culture, we have racism. So for example, like dark girls word versus a light girl, or a
oh
dark
my God, that is a conversation we're going to get into later. Oh my God.
Right? So for me, I felt like we need to know who we are before we even reach out to the Black community, because we don't even know what we are at. So that was a struggle, like constantly. I mean, I love the UK chapter. Even within the chapters that I have in SLYO, I felt like UK was one of the chapters that really stood up for this matter. And I'm like, oh my God, perfect. This is one group actually here in LA. They actually started, talking about Black Lives Matter, but then there was so much backstab, why
like
Sri Lankan culture, this and that, going back and forth. It just, everybody's finding an excuse to pop themselves out and say, talk about me, talk about our cultural matters. I'm like, that's not to the point. This is it. So I think as like the younger generation, I felt they stood up and they stuck to the point. They're like, look what it is. And then I love the fact that UK chapter touched about skin color within our culture as well. And, the lightning cream, and so much came out 2020. I think SLYO probably got it. So much came out. And so it's going to be a struggle. The way I look at SLYO as a nonprofit organization, when I created, I wanted people to talk about these topics. I want to give a platform to youth to talk about these topics. So, I know, Shashini, we were talking about, somebody was talking really nasty about one of the art or post. I was like, oh my God, it's not new. So we're going to get this. And all I say is we'll just stick to the point and continue saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. They just have to.
I think when I started promoting the event and like even doing the research and getting into it, I was very naive. I thought we'd be all for it. But to get that backlash, I was like, wow, okay. But I am quite proud of the younger generation, because I don't know whether you've heard of the modern minority myth, where one race is considered better than the other. So we, like, even as the brown community, I don't think I could ever understand what the Black community is going through, because I have certain privileges and that I'm aware of now because of all the research I'm doing. And that notion is still there with the older Lankan generations. But the younger generations are debunking that myth, and which I love it, actually destroying it. And it's just, how do I say this? Like, the Lankan community is we are very nationalist. And even when I saw the comment, it's lefty politics, we are a very socialist country as well. So I didn't quite understand that. And
that's something that I've seen like a surgence of, like, people are afraid to say Black Lives Matter because it's turned into a political thing. Rather than, like, no, like, I just want to be able to walk down the street without getting shot by the police. You know what I mean?
I don't know, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the Lankan community, I feel like we don't want to support like an equal rights movement because we know how we treat our own minorities.
Right.
So this movement is actually, because there were protests that happened in Sri Lanka for the Black Lives Matter movement, which was, again, there was police brutality involved by discarding the movement, and the excuse was it was COVID-19. But if we open up a conversation on how we treat our own minorities, and I mean, I'm 27 years old, I'm Lankan, but I did not realize we had a Black community in Sri Lanka itself.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, like, and they were called kafir people, but I didn't realize that kafir was actually a derogatory term.
Really?
It means, in Arabic, it means the unbelievers.
I'm actually learning stuff here myself, because all of my friends that are from Sri Lanka are Tamil. So like, I'm learning. I had no idea.
Yeah. And I found out, like, because in Sri Lanka you've got many minorities. You got Lankans who descend from the Europeans, the Portuguese, and the Dutch, and there's a union, the Dutch Burger Union, which preserves that culture.
Right.
But we don't have anything to preserve the Kafir culture.
Right.
They speak Creole. They speak that they bought the baila music. I don't know whether you've heard of baila, but it's a very Portuguese thing. But they actually formed baila music, and no one knows that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't made any. We haven't gone far enough to preserve that culture at all. We'll preserve a culture that was white, but we haven't made any movements towards preserving a minority, like a black culture.
But I think that that's not just reflective in like Sri Lankan culture. I think that that's like, so
Yeah.
an example is like suddenly everybody is tearing down all of the racist statues that is across London and the US and everywhere and all that sort of stuff, right? And it's kind of like so it's like the statue kind of represents like, I don't want to say erosion, but almost like it's almost like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like, you know, when you have a statue of like a slave owner or whatever, and it's kind of like the glorification of like liberty and every man being equal and everything like that, and it kind of like turns a blind eye and completely just like smothers all of the suffering and prejudice and death pretty much, and like all of those gruesome things that happen to Black people is kind of just like swept under the rug, you know. And now it's kind of like, I don't want to, what's the word, like I don't want to like kind of
erase it,
underplay what you said just now about like, you know, Black culture in Sri Lankan communities kind of being erased. But I think that the erosion of Black culture isn't just in Sri Lankan communities. It's global. Everybody's realizing now that it's been happening, you know. Everybody's kind of like, oh, like damn, you know, like this is everywhere. So I did not know that though. That's crazy. I'm definitely going to speak to my Sri Lankan friends about this after this conversation.
I mean,
and like the Lankan community, we have been ignorant to the issue.
Right.
And like on a personal level, like I was telling Mo, like we had this conversation before, and like I said, we've never had a conversation on race, and I felt like I let down my Black friends and my colleagues by not talking about it, by not shedding light on the issues.
Right, but you wouldn't have known that though. Like you didn't.
Like I was, and I feel bad. Like I feel like I've been ignorant to it because I'm like, it's COVID-19. We're working from home. I've had more time to get involved, do my research, and whereas if it happened pre-COVID, I don't think I would have. I would have acknowledged it, but I wouldn't have gone this far.
It's true. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I feel like when we speak about privilege, for example, it's blind spots in your perspective, right? So I gave you the example of how just before uni, I was exploring, maybe in the first year of uni, I was exploring the Everyday Sexism Project, like in its so-called infancy, right? And I was reading all these stories, and it was kind of like how sexual assault kind of was so widespread and so wide scale, but as a male, yeah, okay, I might have been, I've definitely been groped, and a few inappropriate things have happened to me, but I've never registered it as a physical threat, right?
Yeah.
And also, just as a guy, I've never had that feeling of feeling unsafe. I've never had someone have the audacity, apart from, again, once or twice, to touch me inappropriately, to speak to me inappropriately in a public place. So when I was reading hundreds and hundreds of messages, I was like, is the website self-selecting? Because I've never experienced it. So I started speaking to female friends, family members, started to educate myself. But I think the problem was just, it wasn't even in my field of vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? So sometimes you can't Google things that are just not even in your field of vision. If you've never been called a racial slur, and I'm not saying this is the case for people on the call, but I'm just saying generally, or you've never experienced certain things that Black people are experiencing across the UK,
you wouldn't know.
You just wouldn't. It wouldn't come to you. The second thing I wanted to say is, and this is with all movements, and I think minorities in general are conditioned to think like this. One person's struggle isn't detriment to your position.
Yeah.
So
Right.
if you decide to elevate the Black cause in the Sri Lankan community, that's not coming at a cost to you. That's not somehow bringing you down. But I feel like we're taught to kind of have this sort of obeying mentality where we're like, okay, don't rock the boat. Don't be that race guy. Don't be that angry Black woman on that. Don't be the typical Asian that's a social justice
I've done
warrior.
that so many
You know,
times.
just dress a certain way, speak a certain way. And the
Yeah.
minute you start speaking up for other minorities, people are inherently tribal because they feel threatened.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so they'll say, what's this Black thing
I think
about?
that
We've
that
got
is
to,
such an, like when somebody, like, if I say Black Lives Matter, it's literally as you said, yeah, like the feeling threatened. I think that speaks volumes about the position that person is in to feel threatened in the first place. Like, if I say Black Lives Matter and you feel threatened by that, that says to me that you're in a position of privilege and you don't want somebody to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's the thing. People have to be willing to, because look, we benefit off racism. We benefit off oppression.
Yeah.
Economically, I mean, when we were talking about the statues and effectively we're talking about British Empire.
Absolutely.
We're celebrating that, how great Britain, you know, and how it ruled all these countries.
Disgusting.
But the UK has gone to great lengths to bury their own history.
Yeah.
Was ashamed of it because of the atrocities. And I think if you look at empire, that's actually what links all the former colonies together. That's what links Black and Sri Lankans together. That's what links all of these people that were once under British rule and subjected to racism and segregation, all sorts of things. So one thing I would say is to sort of my Sri Lankan friends, other friends from other backgrounds, other faiths. I say this to some of my friends who are, for example, from Arabic-speaking countries, but are not necessarily Black, right? So they might be Kuwaiti or Iraqi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they say to me, "Why are you?" I said, "I am Black, though. I speak Arabic, but I am Black." And they're like, "Yeah, but still." I'm like, "No. Why aren't you protesting for Palestine, for example?"
What has that got to do with what you just
I am protesting for Palestine, but what?
Oh my gosh!
The are mutually exclusive.
Somebody posted in the chat at 11:46 just now.
Colonial indoctrination.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read it out. That's such a colonial indoctrination. The innate desire to be the good immigrant, and in order to be successful within Western culture, it's better to be silent. Oh my God, that's so true.
Yep.
Conforming and supporting of those in privilege rather than speak for those oppressed. It's absolutely true.
She summarized it.
Perfectly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And also, this kind of mindset actually divides the struggle.
Absolutely.
So one thing I did like about the BLM protest, when I did go the first protest on the Saturday, I liked that I saw people who, I saw one Palestinian kid at the top protesting, saying Black Lives Matter. And I saw some of the younger members of his family bring him there, because I know that dynamic. I'm not saying Palestinian people aren't supportive. I'm not saying people necessarily from some Arabic speaking countries, all of them are not supportive, but I know the politics within it.
Yeah.
And when people say you've got to choose this movement versus that movement, no. Why can't you just in principle be in favor, of progressing human rights, progressing dignity, giving people a place at the table?
It's so bizarre that you say that, because so for example, I've been quite vocal. I'm posting about Black Lives Matter on my Instagram, but I'm also posting about what's happening in Yemen, and I'm also posting about, other things. And then I wouldn't even say he's my friend, just somebody that followed me on Instagram messaged me, and he was like, just to be clear, this person is Black. And he messaged me and he was like, so Black lives don't matter anymore. What has that got to do? Like, I can say free Palestine and talk about what's happening in Yemen and still say Black Lives Matter. And it's kind of like, people don't think that you can multitask.
That's the thing. It's that scarcity mentality that's been.
It's so bizarre. I find that so, honestly, I'm not even offended by it. I just find it strange, because it's kind of like you're suggesting to me that I can't talk about two things at once. Logically, does that even make sense to you? Like, I actually have to think about it sometimes, and I'm like, go look in the mirror and tell me what you just say to me, what you just said, and look yourself in the eye and tell yourself, does that make sense?
Like, it's about being a decent human being.
Yeah, I just don't get it.
I think it's this mentality of scarcity, and that's partly why people say, "Oh, it's a left-wing thing." I have the same debate when it comes to tax, right? And I know everyone sits in a different place about tax and does the government spend the money properly and whatever. But it's this idea that someone else rising or someone being given an opportunity or being given a leg up or being helped in some way is somehow eating out of my hard work. This kind of
You know what I'm saying?
mentality, right? And it applies to race and it applies to so many things. And I think the people that are of that school of thought, that's why they call it lefty politics or lefty this. It's not that. It's understanding that when someone else's human rights and access to justice and all of those things increase, that isn't a detriment to me. That's a better world to live in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
When we all eat at the table, we're all eating together. Like, thank you.
I just want to touch on, like, we've touched on a little bit on what the movement kind of means to you. Like, when we had our own conversation, Mo, there was a little bit on how you told me you're rediscovering the movement. And you said you identified yourself as Sudanese, Muslim, then Black. But, like, how has that changed? Or how has what does the rediscovering the movement mean to you now?
it's interesting. So yeah, for me, African was the main thing, right? Sudanese people are very proud people. We're Sudanese, we're African. And so the reason I had that discussion was I was thinking, how have I managed to navigate microaggressions? Some of them not so micro, to be honest.
Especially working with so micro.
Right, exactly. So that's more of a more recent thing, but just even general, like growing up, being able to politely deconstruct ideas, not get angry, not get emotional. I find it funny how people are stop being so emotional.
It's literally my life, but okay.
Yeah. But I thought I was trying to deconstruct why I had that edge over some of my other Black friends. Yeah. Why was it? It's not that I'm more articulate than them. It's not that I'm more intelligent than them. Actually, they're smarter than me and they're better with words than me. But I just didn't have this anger. And I was thinking, why? Like, and I think it's partly by design. I think, so let's say Sudanese people, right? I think when you move to a country, they're very aware of the racism. They're very aware that you're not starting at the same place, right? You're not going to be viewed at the same place. My dad always gave me that speech about you need to be like Muhammad Ali, deliver knockouts so you can't win on points.
Get half of what they have or whatever.
Right. All this stuff about you need to work double as hard. And I know everyone on the schools had the similar speech in just different ways, right?
Yeah.
And I found it to be true, to be honest with you.
Same.
But what it forced me to do, to come back to your question, is kind of say, right, now that I'm reading more, I've always read about Black history, but now I'm reading more about Black history through the lens of being Black. I'm identifying more as Black. It wasn't like I was before saying, oh, I'm not Black. It's more like being Sudanese and being African was more of the cornerstone of my personal identity. And so therefore, I didn't have what is known as the baggage, the chip on my shoulder, as people like to say. And that allowed me to navigate through racism a lot easier than some of my other Black friends. When I spoke to a really good Ghanaian friend of mine called Kobina, who were both like hashing this out. And he said, being Black and being Ghanaian African were put at the same level for him when he was growing up, right?
Yeah.
And that wasn't necessarily the case for me. And when I went to the protest and I was given a speech to a bunch of people at the protest, I found myself getting really emotional. Like, usually I've given loads of speeches, they're quite calm, sometimes a few jokes. I'm shouting partly because the megaphone is shit and there's a lot of people, but I'm also shouting because I'm so angry. I hadn't felt that sort of rage in a long time.
I just want to show them, like, I couldn't find the video.
Okay.
It was on the story, and I just want to show people that.
Oh, yeah, that photo.
He was at the protest, and it was a very passionate speech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny that photo went viral because
it did. Yeah.
a lot of people hitting me up saying, "Oh, is this you or her? This is you." And I'm like, "Yeah, that is me." But it's interesting because what this has done for me is it's made me examine how I self-identify.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason there's that examination is because you've shape-shifted so many different times to fit into different places, where it's the whether you speak or whether I choose to wear a shirt like this or where I wear a hoodie. Or, do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and that's naturally evolved over time anyway. Like I was saying to Chini, before uni, I was a tracksuit, basketball shoe guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you'd have to put me at gunpoint to be seeing me wearing anything else. I think that evolution happened, probably it was a bit earlier than that even, where I started to like wear different clothes and whatever and speak in a different way. And I don't know if that was I think that's partly a conscious thing. And I think your identity just naturally molds. So the point now that if I meet someone from my area who I used to know, my vocabulary switches, the way I speak, my accent switches, it's an unconscious thing. And that kind of links into identity. So what does it mean to be black? If you're black, does that mean you can't be well-spoken? Does that mean you can't have a standard English accent?
Yeah.
Or is speaking like a roadman more black? What is black? You know, so it's kind of wrestling. And also other black people are trying to push onto you what being black means. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I hate that.
Yeah. You struggle.
I hate, like, the whole... So, as you said before, I, like, with your friend that's Ghanaian and black, I totally understand what he means when he says that they're both on equal, like, playing field. Because for me, it's like, I cannot have one without the other.
Yeah.
So I am both of them equally. Yeah. And, you know, definitely for me growing up, I was surrounded by people that looked like me. So being Ghanaian was at the forefront of my mind because that was something that I was most proud of. It wasn't until I was about 11 years old that I'd walked down the street and I first became aware, actually, that's not true. I first became aware of like my race making me different when, like, obviously I'm born and bred in London, but my first memories of when I was in Ghana, because my mum took me back to Ghana, and the first 5 years of my life was in Ghana. So I remember coming back to the UK and starting nursery late, and I remember walking into the nursery even at 5 years old and being like, people look like me, you know, like, and that's something that's really disconcerting to think as a 5-year-old, to realize that you're separate from your peers. At the time, I didn't realize the gravity of what I was thinking, but I just used to be like, wow, these people are really pale, like they don't look like me at all. So like as I've like grown up and gone through secondary school and stuff like that, the way I speak and the fact that, you know, other black people would label me as unusual because I like anime and I like to draw and I like to do nerdy things like skateboard, and what else was I doing? Like play basketball and yo-yo and do fitness and stuff like that. Like, it was so bizarre to me that other black people were telling me that I wasn't black enough because I didn't conform to the stereotype that is from a negative connotation anyway.
Yes.
So it was kind of just like weird to me seeing other black people tell me that I wasn't black enough. Then that all changed and I went to university, because then suddenly, like, I don't know, it's as you said, like, the Black Lives Matter movement has definitely challenged my identity in a good way, because now I'm proud to be black, I'm proud to be Ghanaian, but now I'm noticing amongst my black friends and the black community on Twitter in general that other black people now are shaming other black people that make black people feel un-black.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask, like, do you ever get backlash for certain, have either of you been told you're not black enough to support the Black Lives Matter movement?
So no, and I don't think anybody would dare. But I have had, like, especially amongst my American friends, like, I don't really see this much with my British friends, because, like, so I'll give you an example, right? So I like the term ratchet because it's ironic, because it's like black women are labeled as like being, so for example, I sometimes like to call myself ratchet because I know that I'm the complete opposite of that. I have a first class law degree, I have a master's degree, I'm doing my LPC, do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, I find it amongst my black American friends, oh, they'll be like, oh damn, I don't know a black girl that like watches Naruto and anime and likes to listen to rock music. And it's kind of like, well, then you live in a shit community. Sorry, I don't like, do you know what I mean? I don't want to, but I haven't necessarily had people per se tell me that I'm not black enough to support the Black Lives Matter movement. But I have had black people question me for the people, like, so I'll give you an example. My boyfriend is Bulgarian. He's white. He's like European or whatever. And, you know, people be like, yeah, black power, black love, you know, black supporting black businesses. And then I definitely had black people be like, but your boyfriend is Eastern European. What's that got to do with the fact that I support the Black Lives Matter movement? You know what I mean? So they would never dare say to me that I'm not black enough to support it. But there's definitely like because you're not all black encompassing and you're not dating a black person and all of this, that suddenly like my opinion is less like mitigated.
Yep.
And then when I drop, it's like, actually, I work on police brutality cases and I've probably done more in my life than you've done in like your entire lifetime. Then they're like, oh my God, but it's like, I shouldn't have to justify that. I shouldn't have to justify my support of the Black Lives Matter movement with what I've done in my life. Me being black alone is sufficient, in my opinion. But yeah, sorry, that answers your question.
I completely agree with Natalie. Completely agree. Personally, I haven't had anyone rock up to me and say, oh, you're not black enough, blah, blah, blah. What I have had, though, is different pieces of my identity pulled to try and pull me away from being black.
Exactly.
So people are like, oh, yeah, but Sudan has an Arab element to it, which it does. It does.
Oh my
because
God.
it's Arabic speaking, but it's also got a Nubian element. So my grandmother was Nubian, which is one of the oldest civilizations, just before the pharaohs, right?
Yeah.
And they were all like jet black, the Nubians, right?
Yeah.
So people will try and pull you away. And my Middle Eastern friends do this all the time. They're like, yeah, but Mo, come on, like similar music, we both speak Arabic, come on, like actually.
How can I be both? Like, I just don't understand.
Yeah, it's like,
what's all these rules?
It's the thing. Sudan is a black country that has close to 300 languages, the main one being Arabic, and then you've got other languages, right? The thing is, people will try and piece away. Like, I have friends of mine, similar to Natalie as well. They'll be like, like, okay, why are you doing that? It's a bit white.
So I'm going to ask you something. I've got a question for you, Mo.
Go for it.
So my housemate, one of my housemates, he's Algerian, right?
Yeah.
And me and him had a really, really interesting conversation the other day, because I find that sometimes West Africans, and I can say West Africans because I am West African, I find that sometimes Africans try to compete against each other with who's more African.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
That happens all the time. So like, I was speaking to Samir, and Samir was like, yeah, I'm Algerian, And I had to ask Samir, like, do you feel that you're Arab first or African first? Because, and you could be both, doesn't really matter. I don't think there's any rules. But he was like, I definitely feel like other Africans make me feel like I'm not African enough because I'm Algerian, because I speak Arabic, because I look like I'm Arab. And I'm kind of like, that's a shame, man. That's a damn shame.
And you'll notice, it's by no accident. You go to any ACS event, so Caribbean
all West African.
Or there might be a couple of East Africans sprinkled in. You have your Kenyans there, you know, maybe a couple of Somalis for good effect. But like generally,
they're West Africans.
West Africans. And I think it's interesting what you said, because Sudan, I think the reason why Sudan's more clear cut than Tunisia and Algeria, one is skin color. Two, Sudan also has, before the cessation, so before Sudan was split into Sudan and South Sudan, there's a very clear African presence in Sudan. It's the most bordered country in Africa, right? So you've got people from Uganda, you've got people from Ethiopia, you've got people from all countries coming in. So you look at South Sudan and you're like, oh, that's what a stereotypical black man looks like. Tall, muscular, big facial features, dark. Okay, but those people are Sudanese. And that's kind of why we had that whole fight, because of that ethnic. And then you go to another part of Sudan, people are a lot more fairer. They might even look Puerto Rican or something. And so it's that division that people have played on for so long to try and make you think, yeah, you got to pick a side, you got to choose.
That division has an impact on the Black Lives Matter movement. So like
Of course.
for example, Samir, he went to the Black Lives Matter protest. I couldn't go, but I was already doing my part. You know, everybody does their part in different ways. But anyway, so Samir went to the Black Lives Matter protest, and you know, he had an interesting conversation with some people there. Almost like, moving on to the next topic is kind of like, so I'll use Samir and my boyfriend as an example. So my boyfriend would like say that he feels like sometimes if he says something in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, he doesn't care. He will say it with his chest anyway. But like he's had people pull him up and be like, but you're not Black.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right? And then
Yeah.
Samir's had people pull him up and be like, but you're Arab. And it's kind of like, what has that got to do with, you can be a man and be a feminist. What's that got to do with, do you know what I mean?
I think, you know, it's so interesting, the politics behind that, because I feel like that some people, they get into that space. I'm not trying to legitimize those responses. They get into that space because they think, a bit like companies are co-opting the movement. They almost see people that aren't Black as co-opting the movement. Like, oh, now it's fashionable. Okay, well, you're not Black, so you'll never understand. Now, some of that is true. Some of that, a little sliver of that is true, but it's not the right response.
It's not the right
unhelpful.
response.
And also, it's actually, you're practicing what you're fighting against.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excluding people from having a voice and kind of joining. And okay, the Blackness in this movement should be more prominent because it's coming from experience and not so much books. By the way, it's a good book, Akala's book, read it. But it's another thing, the interracial relationships. I want to really touch on this. I don't even like the word interracial.
Neither
it's
do
just
I.
a relationship. Let's run with it,
But it's
right?
there.
But it's there, yeah.
Yeah, it's there. So let's talk about it. So Sachini knows I've gone through a French phase for whatever reason. I'll call it that, right? Where I dated a...
Was I there for that phase?
I
feel like maybe I was there for that phase. I don't know.
Well, that phase happened at uni. That was it was a good 2 years of uni. Yeah, so I went through a phase for whatever reason. I was just dating Parisian women or just women from like just whatever, right? Not all of them were like only white French, but there were sometimes mixed. Like the last like serious ex was Tunisian, right? So, but grew up in France. So I went through a phase like that. I don't even like to call it a phase. I've dated different people, and those were a contingent of people that I had dated, and people
Definitely had a thing.
Okay, maybe, I don't know. But the thing is, a lot of my Black friends pulled me up on it. It was like, yo, when's the last time you dated a sister? And I said, I'm not gonna lie, it's been a while.
Why does that even matter?
It's been a minute. But that doesn't mean I don't find them attractive.
Yeah, I get that all the time, man.
Michael B. Jordan was dating a white woman, and so many Black women were getting angry. And I get why they're getting angry, but the focus that it's a white woman shouldn't be the focus. Just like if a Sri Lankan person decides to date an Italian, okay, you might be angry at, let's say, Italy's treatment of Sri Lankan people living in Italy, particularly Rome.
Yeah.
You can't be angry at the fact that she's in a relationship with someone who's Italian. It doesn't, like, the two don't really make sense. Like at the moment I'm dating a white German, right? Now, again, when I'm exploring my relationship with being Black, I actually made some discoveries. When I was speaking to my Ghanaian friend, we spoke for like 5 hours on the phone. It's crazy. But we tapped in. I said, to what extent have we also, without realizing, and I think this comes into the Fair and Lovely and the skin lightening creams and stuff, to what extent have we internalized white standards of beauty? And maybe that's more of an academic and it's a messy discussion, but it's an important one to have, because I noticed small things that were slowly fed to me unconsciously, like in the Sudanese community, like, oh, you're a bit on the darker side, so, you know, and people say shit like this. Make sure, like, when you marry someone a little bit lighter than you.
My mom says that to me.
So your kids will be lighter.
Yeah. Or someone will say to me,
it's a curse.
Right, they'll say to me, her facial features are a bit big. And I'm like, okay.
This being dark is a curse, man.
And I started internalizing this shit. So I started realizing, like, definitely date black women, really positive experiences. But somewhere along the line, I started saying, is my attraction to, let's say, Latino women, and I hate that general term, because, and this is very crude, so forgive me, but I'm just speaking honestly here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it because they've got the best of both worlds, as some guys like to say?
Yeah, say that.
Is it because they've got the softer features, whether that means slightly smaller features and a lighter complexion, but they've got the body that black women many black women naturally have, right?
Yeah.
And so I started decomposing it. I was like, why is it that I like long, soft hair, for example? Why? It's not a must for me, but why do I default to that? Why is it that I'm more hesitant if I'm dating a girl with, let's say, very large features? So I'm still attracted to black women, but I'm realizing I'm selecting the black women who are based on certain things. And you can't airbrush that out. And I think a lot of black people, when you do the self-discovery, when you do the work, you realize, shit, I've internalized all of this crap that my family has fed to me over the time.
Like, as a black woman, I can say for a fact, with all my black friends that are women, that we've all gone through periods of our life where, like, we feel like undesirable, like literally the bottom of the last pick. Do you know what I mean? So it's crazy to me. Like, even now as an adult, 25 years old, there were times when I was a teenager where I think somebody, man or woman, was attractive, and the first thing that will come to my mind is, but does he even like black girls like that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear
I'm gonna say something. Like, at uni, when it came to dating or whatever, at uni, most of the guys actually had a problem. Like, they had a hard time figuring out whether I was black or whether I was Asian, and they'd start talking to me when they find out I'm brown, not black.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, as a black woman growing up, I've had to deal with a lot of nonsense men in my life, only because I'm very confident now. But back in uni, I wasn't. So it's like any person that would approach me, it was almost like, oh my God, I can't believe that this person likes me, kind of thing. Because I had internalized the fact that I was at the bottom of the barrel so much that it's frightening. It is absolutely frightening. And I had to deal with that, not just in uni, but how I grew up. Because my mum would say stuff like, you need to relax your hair because it's nappy, and make sure you don't turn too dark in the sun anytime we go to Ghana. So she'd already, like, made it out to be like being black was an unattractive thing in my head. So it's like I saw myself as unattractive. And then when I used to go back home, slowly, as my confidence started to build, and I started to be like, actually, I don't really care. Like, I'm actually so done with seeing myself this way. It wasn't until then that my mum would start to be like, you're coming across as too abrasive. So it's like they always try to, like, I don't know how to describe it, but you know exactly what I'm trying to say. It's
almost as if they want to make sure you are white.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even the guys that did like me, they would fetishize me. They would be like as if I was some sort of dairy cake to kind of, like, try. I even had a guy come up to me in uni and be like, oh, I've never been with a black girl before. And it wasn't until my friend at the time, when he said that to me, my friend who I was with, she literally looked at the guy and she was like, you know that she's not some sort of delicacy that you just save her. Like, she's a human being. Like, don't do that. And it took her saying that to be like, actually, I'm actually, like, I deserve love. But black women grow up thinking that we don't, because of how other people have made us feel, or like how blackness is visualized. So it's kind of like, as we go back to the conversation between dark skin and light skin, right? If a guy come up to me and he tells me, and I have had this, if I could get money on how many times that I had this in my life, I'd be a millionaire. So a guy compliments me, and the first thing back in the day, this doesn't happen to me anymore. But if I get complimented by a guy, it'd be like, where you from? Ghana. Raw. Kind of light skinned for a Ghanaian. You sure you're not mixed?
Oh.
Why has me being mixed got to do with what? You know what I mean?
Many times, yeah.
Times. So like, I don't know, it's just nuts, man. Growing up as a black woman and you don't even see women that look like you on the TV to even think that you're beautiful. Nobody on the TV looks like you. It's just like the European standard of beauty in your face everywhere.
And even the black women that are on TV, I mean, not so much now, but in the past, they were light-skinned.
They were light-skinned.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of just like, oh man, black women have to overcome so much. Also, I have to go. I'm really, really sorry, but I need to
Okay.
1 o'clock. I'd love to do this sort of podcasting again. This is incredible. Any next one, just invite me and I'm there.
Hit me up, Natalie. Hit me up.
We should do a thing. Like we should do a podcast, something like that.
I'll get you on the podcast.
I would love that. That'd be great, honestly.
Perfect.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye. How do I get out? Okay. Bye.
Just going from that, do you have any personal stories that you want to share?
Yeah, sure. I always find personal stories interesting because, you know, it's like, I think me and you discussed this on the phone. At first I was thinking, I don't have any personal stories. And then I started thinking about it and I was like, oh, I have a lot of personal stories. And I just didn't internalize them because what I was trying to say is almost this viewing myself as black and being black as a real part of my identity wasn't there, and that insulated me from a lot of racism. So I've had a spectrum of things. 2016 in my own area, which is a very multicultural area, used to be predominantly Asian, and now it's becoming a lot more Middle Eastern. You're getting a lot different demographic, right? But someone rolled down his window at me because I cut him off, right? Apparently cut him off, didn't cut him off, but he felt I cut him off and thought it was appropriate to call me a nigger. Definitely had some monkey chants in less diverse parts of Europe. But again, you don't think of these things. You don't really process them that much. Being the only black person in a law firm, working on the case, working with a senior partner who's like a big deal there. There was one other Cameroonian guy, very lovely guy, who worked in the reprographics department, which is basically photocopying and binding cases and stuff like that. And so one lady very rudely came to me very late at night and chucked a whole stack of papers at me and was like, I thought I asked you to do this 3 hours ago. And I was like, excuse me? And I was like, what do you want me to do? Due diligence? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to revise the contract? Do you want me to do some research? I don't remember being assigned this piece of work. She was like, it's simple. Just bind it, for God's sake. This is what we pay you people to do. Now, maybe you people meant you reprographics people, fine. But also, how are you confusing me with the only other black guy in the whole building? And I just had to politely say, actually, no, I'm working with Gary Bourne. He came out of his office, she got shook, and she took her papers and was like, I'm really sorry, and just kind of, went down. Even, this is the thing about racism, this is the thing about microaggressions. It's not always so blatant as the rolling down the window, but it's all these small things, and you start to tally up how other people of other races are treated and how hard you have to fight. For example, right now, it happens at you have to really break your back to prove yourself. But yeah, there've been loads of, again, I would say mainly microaggressions, some blatant racism. And there've been times where people, you're in a suit, you're speaking well, you do all the classic code switching things, and people say, oh, can you go and make me a cup of tea? Or they think you're, they wouldn't say that if I was white. Or, someone said to me a while ago, there's been a bit of a spill. You don't think you could go and clear it out?
A bit.
I was just like, there's been a bit of a spill. What? So I'm going to get the mop out and clear it up for you.
Yeah.
And that's not even in our meeting. Fair enough, if that's in our meeting, someone spilled coffee or something. I wouldn't take offense if someone said, "Hey Mo, do you mind getting that rag on and just giving it a little wipe?" But that's in another part of the building. You tell me there's been a little spill, and I'm there to chair that meeting. So there's all these things. Now I've always been hesitant to rush and say things are racism. And the reason why is because, again, I feel like many people have told me that's not going to help your case. Just be good. Don't be that guy. For example, if I'm in an all, let's say, white town, let's say I'm in a part of, let's just say I'm a part of London that's predominantly white, like let's say Uxbridge, for example. Certain parts of Uxbridge are really white. And I'm on a train. Maybe I've received a microaggression or whatever. I'm on a train and it's full of, the carriage is entirely white and I'm just standing there. Someone might be screw facing me and there might be something going on behind me. I'll usually give that person the benefit of the doubt, which is they're not screw facing me because of my color. They're screw facing me because there's something behind me.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is when you start internalizing your experiences, you kind of develop a bit of a paranoia. And I think that's why I kind of dissociated blackness from my identity a little bit. So I wouldn't be angry.
Yeah.
Because I can understand why a lot of black people are angry. They get a lot of bullshit all the time. And if you call a spade, you know, it is partly down to your race.
Yeah.
It is. I've seen, not just black people, I've seen how people react when an Indian person, for example, a person from India,
Or a
British
Muslim guy comes in with a bag.
That's it. Or a hijabi or whatever. And they kind of like,
yeah.
Don't know about him. Don't know about her. They've got a bit of a dodgy accent.
Yeah.
So I've experienced a gamut of things. I gave you that famous example more recently at uni where this was quite surreal for me. I got in a cab.
Yeah.
A guy said, "Can you pay?" I said, "I'll pay you when we get there," obviously, as I do with all cabs. He said, no, like, I just, I need to make sure you're going to pay. I thought, well, I've used this cab so many times. It's in Brighton. It's late from the station. So I pulled out my wallet. I thought maybe he thinks I'm not good for the money. From experience, taking this cab many times to where I lived, it's £8. It's £8 on the meter. So I said to him, roughly how much do you think it's going to be? He said probably £8 to £10. Great. So I pulled out a 20. Right, I'm good for the money. I promise I'll pay you when we get there. The fact that I'm even having to negotiate is a bit strange, but okay. No, if you don't pay, get out of the car. I've just shown you I have a £20 note. We're in a car with a camera, so I'm not running anywhere. And you've just confirmed to me that it's going to be £8 to £10 in the meter, and I know that from my experience. So what's the issue? Oh, I've just had issues in the past with people. What are those issues? Oh, crime, you get gangs, hoodies, all of that. You gave me that whole speech.
Yeah.
Now, bear in mind, this guy greeted me as brother when he realized my name was Mohammed, right? So that's a strange sort of thing, because he was, I believe, from an Asian background. I don't know. I'm not going to guess the country.
Yeah.
Muslim, right? And so he greeted me as brother, literally. He's like, "What's your name, Mohammed?" "Oh, brother, come in." Greeted me. And now he's making a strange, and then I said, "Come on, spit it out." I said, "I'm not wearing a hoodie and I'm not in a gang. So what is it?" And he said, "Oh, black people, they don't pay. So you either pay the money or you get out." And it's raining, so I get out the car.
Yeah.
I walk home in the rain, lugging a big ass suitcase. I didn't say a thing. I didn't think to call the cab company and say, "Oh, I've had an incident, you guys racist." I just was a bit disappointed, carried on, spoke to my French girlfriend at the time. I thought I'd throw that in since we had the French phase. And she said, she was so outraged. She was like, "This is fucking ridiculous. You should complain. We should sue the company. No. I was like, "It's fine. It's okay. It's not a big deal."
Yeah.
There've been many successive moments like that, and you just you brush them off. You brush them off, and it's only actually sometimes when I realize I feel more outraged by the denial and the excuses made than I do of the racism itself, because it's a willful ignorance, and that boils my blood more than any. There's two things that really irritate me: willful ignorance and kind of trying to mask and suppress people's truths, whether that be a struggle for independence or whether that be whatever racially, and then two, holding people back when they want to develop themselves. So if someone wants to do a training course and wants to better themselves, and you're actively holding them back, and you see this in the school system, I'm like, just give kids the exam papers, give them exam practice papers. You've got a question bank, 300 exam papers or 300 exam questions in the question bank. Give kids access. No, we need to drip feed them. The stinginess that you don't see in private education. So those are two things that make me furious more than the racism I'm experiencing.
I'm curious to know whether anyone here has had any experiences. Like, I know myself, when like 5 years ago when I started doing my internship with the Met Police, and it was actually Brixton with so many issues, and this woman came up to me and my colleague, and the whole intern scheme was based on getting minorities and women into the police force. And this woman basically came up to us and said, "Are you one of the graduate police officers?" And said, "We don't like people like you joining." And like, I dismissed it as, oh, maybe she meant graduate. But then like thinking about it more, like this was Brixton, and Brixton is, if for anyone who's been there, like, it's very diverse, but the police department is very white. And came home thinking about it, and it's like, I don't think she meant graduates. I think she meant, we don't like minorities joining the police. That's what it felt like to me. So like, I'm curious to know whether you guys have had any experiences with racism, whether in the UK, in LA, or I'm very interested to hear. Does anyone? Yep.
Was someone going?
I'll
go if you guys want. So I'm Shika. You guys probably know me. Sorry, I sound like sleepy because I was half sleeping. Sorry for my voice. When I first moved to United States, like, I mean, I'm brown girl, so like I was the only brown girl in my school. I had a problem with the English too, so it was like really weird. They started bullying me just because I was brown, and I felt like left out. It was really like awkward. Like, so many things happened. They would start talking behind my back. I was like cornered just because I was brown, and the whole school was white. Like 75% was white. It was I didn't know what to do. I was a kid. I was like 10 years old.
Yeah.
Everything was new to me. Like, they just made me feel like different and, in a word, like stupid.
Yeah, I think that's something like a lot of us feel. Like, I don't think, especially when we're younger, being called racist words like packy, like when you're younger, you don't realize that's a racist term, but as you grow up, you kind of realize it is. And the schools itself wasn't really helping us. The school didn't help us fight it or even acknowledge it was racism. Or, I mean, I don't think even now workplaces kind of help with the racism. They just dismiss it. Does anyone else have any experiences? Thanks, Adeshika, for contributing.
I had not about experiences, but I actually had a question.
Yep.
And I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts and or everyone's thoughts on this. Earlier we were talking, or you were mentioning how so I'm coming from California, or I'm in California, but earlier you had mentioned that kind of the surprise that the Sinhala community is not, and the Sri Lankan community is not more like intuitively for the Black Lives Matter movement. And I guess I just wanted to bring up that, like, I think one of the things that we need to like situate in terms of us, and I have a question at the end too, but I just want to like, one of the things that like is important to that dialogue is that as at least like in the community, and I don't know how it is in the UK, but like in the Sinhala community that I've grown up in, and that I know here, I think like our history of migration and like, and our community itself really matters in terms of like where, I'm an immigrant to here, but like where both myself and my parents, like the situation that we come from. So like as Sinhala people, like we have a legacy of oppression in our own country, right? And I think that feeds into the way, like in America, Sinhala people often vote conservative, and a lot of people voted for Trump, for example. And I do think that there is that connection. And I think that relates to the way that there is a lack of support for Black Lives Matter, or a backlash around Black Lives Matter, because we have a history, that like, that connects to these kind of oppressive norms within our own community. And I think somebody brought up like colorism earlier and things like that. I think, you know, beyond colorism, like the Black Lives Matter is not just, it's not just about the everyday interactions, right, that Black communities are facing. It's also like the structural ways that racial inequality is continued. And so I guess I was curious in terms of, I actually haven't really interacted with SLYO too much, and it was really cool to see that this event was happening. But I was, from there, I was curious as to like how you foresee this organization and everything like moving forward from that lens of not just thinking about our positionality as Sri Lankans in the UK or the US, but the ways that are like the legacies that we carry with us, like how that also feeds into the way that we interact with not only Black communities here, but the communities that we, you know, our communities are part of oppressing in our own, in Sri Lanka and also here. Like, how do you, I guess I was just curious to hear, and it doesn't necessarily, sorry, I don't mean to like put it on you, Sachini, I'm just curious if anyone else also wants to chime in as well. Like I would love to hear, and part of the reason why I'm asking is because I think it sounds like a lot of, or what I've seen on social media and things like that is like, within South Asian communities and whatnot, like there's a lot of internal dialogue that's happening as well about the ways like our own communities along, like in conjunction with Black Lives Matter. And it's a conversation that, you know, I'm having with my parents and things like that. But as like a community, how do you see us moving forward in that sense? And
so I'm in LA too, so I would love to meet up with you. For your question, you know, since I'm in the community in LA, I can answer you for that. And Sachini, please add anything you need to. So you're right, we do not talk about Black Lives Matter, right? And because we already have issues in our own community, meaning within our own Sri Lankan culture versus Tamils and Sinhalese. That's the bigger issue that we have, right? So a lot of people are asking, why aren't we talking about Tamil Lives Matter? My thing is this, as an organization, as the founder of the organization, we created this platform right now for youth to speak about Black Lives Matter, right? If in past, I grew up here in USA and I've been here for 25 years. So for the longest I remember, I don't recall my parents ever stood up for anybody's lives matter, for any movement, right? So for me growing up, it's about, we've been conditioned through our past history on certain behaviors to not to repeat or not to talk about it, right? So we are breaking that up. And you see, even for you to join such a meeting as this, or even to see this group coming together is a huge thing. It's a huge step up. So I have two kids, one is 15 and 13, and my 13-year-old daughter is much educated about Black Lives Matter than where I was 13 growing up in USA. I grew up with having a lot of Black friends around me, and I always felt like that's where I fit into. I didn't fit into the Sri Lankan community because I didn't know that many Sri Lankans. And my parents kind of did not associate because here in LA, everybody's kind of scattered, right? So I am proud of my kids and seeing them opening up a lot more as to matters. But the sad thing is they don't see the issue between Tamils and Sinhalese because that's not what they're growing up. That's not what they have seen. So they don't even know the difference between any of us. So me talking to, the UK chapter or the Toronto chapter, and I see that like your generation, meaning, this youngsters still see that difference between Tamils and Sinhalese. And they're trying to fight for Black Lives Matter, having this baggage. You see what I mean? So if my kids were to fight about Black Lives Matter, they are fighting as Sinhalese. They don't care about Sri Lankans, Tamils, Muslim, none of that. They're as a human being. They're fighting for somebody, this life matters. This is the culture. These are the people that need help right now. And they're fighting for a direct cost. You see what I mean? So I think it's a huge platform to change this, my parents' mentality or whatnot. But I think action speaks louder than words. Meetings such as like this can make a difference. And I truly believe that. So it's not like I cannot jump into my community and tell all the aunties and uncles, look, I cannot educate them because they have been conditioned in their past through their history not to talk about these forbidden things. And I know a lot of aunties and uncles, actually, they open up their minds and thoughts and ideas to, okay, there is something happening like this, right? We have to look for it, but they don't want to talk about it. So to say that, I think us getting up together, standing up for what is right, gonna show to the world. And even this group, there's another group here in LA who talks about Black Lives Matters, and it's just coming together and supporting one another. I think in that way we can move forward.
And I also find like I struggle to, especially with, like you said, the younger generations, we're still divided in terms of being Sinhalese and Tamil. I struggle to even get people in the same room to talk about our issues without getting politics involved and without getting into a fight. And it's really hard because I would love to have a conversation like this on Voice It with SLYO without the politics. You still need to acknowledge the history and everything that's happened, but I don't think we're very reluctant to move towards reconciliation. And and there are tiny comments, even just on promoting this, there were tiny comments about Tamil and Sinhalese as well. And we were like, but as SLYO, we got everyone here. We got Sinhalese, Tamil, Muslim, Christian, all of us here.
All of us here. And we don't look at it as like, oh, you're from a certain part of the culture. SLYO is not about just Sri Lankans. I have Tamil, Muslim, Mexican, Black, you name it. Everyone is in this organization. So it's nice to see that we come as a whole rather than trying to divide ourselves. So even, right now the matter is Black Lives Matters. And I think I'm a behavior analyst. I study human behavior. So for me, I always tell, it's like I do a lot of parent education, and I tell parents, like, if you believe something, stick to that and follow through with it. That's what you have to do. And I think at this point, we are fighting for Black Lives Matter. And eventually, like Sashini said, if there's a platform or a place for us to speak about other issues in Sri Lanka, I am more than happy to be open about it, to talk about it. But the thing is, there are a lot of people who would say, oh, what about this? What about that? But talk about it, come out and talk about it. Now, like I said, action speaks louder than words. So let's do something about it. Don't criticize somebody else's work, right? Just let's do it. If you want to talk about a matter, come up. We are here for it. Let's see what we can do, because it's all about talking at the end, right? Like at the beginning, the first step is talk about it. So that's what I think.
Thank you. No, I completely agree with that. You've touched on all the points. Like, thank you so much for asking that question, Savani. Like, I hope that answered your question.
Well, I think I was kind of asking a different question in the sense that, like, how do we, like, I wanted to talk more about, like, or my point is more about the connection between, like, our community's silence around Black Lives Matter and our legacy of violence, that like the connection between those things. And it's not to say, it's not to take away from the conversation around Black Lives Matter. The issue is Black Lives Matter right now. But I think it's really, you know, before we can say like, oh, let's all have this conversation together, not us, I meant with all these communities and things like that, it's really important to think about like, like we have to reflect internally, right? Like what are the legacies that is preventing our communities from having conversations around things like Black Lives Matter or even immigrants' rights in America? Like,
I can't speak for everyone else, but on a personal level, I think that's a fear that if we fight for equal rights, if you fight for the Black Lives Matter movement, if you fight for that, then we would have to fight for equal rights for everyone in Sri Lanka. That's what I feel like. So that's what's preventing us from showing support for the cause. And like in America, like here, most Sri Lankans, most Sinhalese people will vote Conservatives, and they are very much brown, like it's prime example of brown conservatives. And so I don't know whether that answers the question, but in terms of forming a connection, I think it's about not wanting to give equal rights to everyone in Sri Lanka and actually having that conversation on how we treat our own minorities. We don't want to do that. So that's why we're not showing support for the Black Lives Matter movement.
yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you. Just to, Nadisha, do you have anything to add or?
No.
Okay. So just to go back to the Black Lives Matter movement in the UK, like I said, a lot of the brown community is very conservative here. I think not even just Sri Lankans, even Indians, and a lot of people in the UK had problem with the movement, and even within our own communities, because the police here don't have guns. We're not trigger happy. But with George Floyd, we saw you don't need a gun to cause police brutality. You don't need a gun to cause death. And that's very evident with the deaths of people like Sean Rigg, Jimmy Mubenga, Rashan Charles, Eshan DaCosta, and funnily enough, Edson DaCosta and Rashan Charles, the chokehold that was used on George Floyd was used on them, and that's how they died. And I don't think people also realize that most of our deaths in the UK happen while being arrested or in custody. And if you go down to Brixton Police, you can actually, I don't know, 5 years ago it was there, I don't know whether it's still there, but there's pictures of all the people that have died in custody. And my question to you, Mo, is like, why, I mean, there was some coverage on these deaths, but we never really looked into it as a community. And not as just the British did not look into it. And in all instances, even Sean Rigg, that was 2008, no police officer was prosecuted, or they were all acquitted. There'd been nothing. Why do you think that we are so hesitant to bring accountability?
Yeah, I mean, before that, I think Savini's question was brilliant.
Yeah.
Because I think it actually scratches at the heart of this question, which is kind of what we touched on earlier. How do you look inwards in terms of your own structural advantages, your own inherent biases that prevent you from seeing the struggles of another community? What are your fears with actually making progress? And I think that touches to the heart of the British question, which is, why is Britain treating racism, which it often talks about, the shorthand for racism has become the issue of George Floyd, because senior leaders within government institutions and other organizations don't want to use the word racism. They don't want to admit that they have a problem with racism. Just like many institutions don't want to admit that they have a problem with sexual harassment. There are so many things that are so widespread and entrenched that if we lift the lid on it, people are like, holy shit. You know, if you look at the figures and these figures change all the time, but if you look at these are old figures, by the way, so feel free to correct me, but 1 in 4 women regularly suffer domestic violence, and that's what's being reported. 2 women a week are killed in this country, and definitely there's a lot of underreporting for domestic violence, right? If we start to uncover the lid on all of these things and say, if we had an honest, anonymized survey at every workplace, at every primary school, at every institution, and said, how many of you have been victims of sexual assault? Or more appropriately, how many of you have survived sexual assault, right? How many of you have experienced racism? We would be horrified. We would be horrified. So to answer your question, I mean, the cases you alluded to are interesting. I mean, Jimmy Mabenga, restrained by G4S on a kind of extradition flight, also shouted, "I can't breathe." And the men weren't convicted. Rashawn Charles also slammed to the ground when you look at the CCTV.
I think he was also like 8 minutes. The chokehold was on him for like 8 minutes.
It was on for a long time, but also they tried to conduct they tried to search his mouth for drugs. Now, apparently, and I don't know this, the protocol need more than 1 officer to attempt such a search, and it should never be attempted in such a position, in such a way. That's something that should be in a controlled environment in the station. But these are sort of the technicalities of all these things, right? I think what's interesting is your question touches at the heart of many things. If I even just go over it, there's a few things to unpick here. So people in the UK have had problems with the movement because police don't have guns. Police in this country do have tasers, though.
Yeah.
We've seen the disproportionate use of those. And it's interesting, people speak about the chokehold. There's a lot coming out now about the fact that officers aren't actually trained in how to fight properly.
But it's actually not even taught in training.
That's the thing.
It's not part of police training itself.
It's, I think martial arts are an essential thing. Fine, that's one element. So if you log on to anyone from the jiu-jitsu community or the martial arts, they'll often critique the chokeholds or the restraint positions being used. And if someone did know how to apply them effectively, you wouldn't need 8 people on one guy. You wouldn't need 4 men with knees in the back and all of this. It's just so disproportionate. So there's that. I think this splits into a few different things. One is the training element, right? So it's not about weapons, but it's the training element. So one is about how do you adequately give officers the tools to make arrests using the proportionate use of force. A lot of it's about protocol as well. So I know I'm diving into solution mode and I will address the question in a second, but a lot of it's about protocol as well. So I was looking at commentary from former Navy SEALs and former Green Berets, Special Forces, basically commenting on how the very setup that led to the shooting is a problem. They're not trained in de-escalation. They're trained in a very kind of these sort of very hostile environment. And they're not given appropriate counseling. They're not being screened properly for their mental health. They're not being taught, how do you approach someone at a distance? Why is your first instinct to go for the gun? So that's a structural issue. So just sticking in more black officers isn't going to change anything in that sense. Sticking in more Asian officers isn't going to change anything in that sense. That's part of the structural problem. Is the kind of built-in violence, and that also informs how communities see police. So the minute you say, okay, we have crime in this area, let's stick a police officer on every corner. I remember on my road, for example, there was unfortunately, an elderly lady that was severely beaten by a burglar, and it came on the Evening Standard. I came back home, no exaggeration, easily up to 30 to 40 police officers on my road. And that's the first half of my road. There were vans, there were cars, because it became a press issue. I didn't feel safe. I felt like that was an occupation. I know it's a bizarre thing. So people's experience of the police really shape that. Now, to come to your question, why is it something to do with being British? Why aren't these things kind of more widely spoke about in Britain, I think it's largely kind of something in the fabric of Britain. So people often speak about American exceptionalism. Well, we have British exceptionalism, and we've been fantastic at distancing ourselves from our past. In his book, Natives, Okala has a really powerful example about something called Operation Legacy, where the British Colonial Office, now known as the Foreign Office, had a program to effectively destroy and hide files to prevent them from being inherited by ex-colonies. So any embarrassing details of British Empire, the things that they did, more or less were buried at sea, were burned, were discarded. And this kind of culture of cover-up has permeated through all our institutions. So if you look at the Macpherson report following the Stephen Lawrence murder, and the police were branded as institutionally racist. If you do your reading around the Macpherson report and you watch the countless documentaries that have come from it, police chiefs burying evidence, people tampering with witness statements, all sorts of crazy things that you kind of would think would see in the films. The second thing is we've abstracted it as an American problem. So even within the Ministry of Justice, we've put a lot of pressure on senior leaders to write communications just addressing the issue because they're scared of saying the wrong thing. But they've referred to it as the George Floyd incident. People don't want to admit that racism is a problem in this country. And I think it's interesting. America has a unique history that's slightly different. And I think one unique thing about America's moment that hasn't happened in Britain as publicly, right? And this is another thing, and maybe Natalie can speak to this I know she's offline, but another time she can speak to this better on the casework she's doing. America's had several moments that have been so publicly brutal that any attempt to say yes, but have effectively been extinguished. Yeah. In the case of George Floyd. So even the most hardened of racists, even your Ku Klux Klan members, your KKK members will say, yeah, that was a little bit much. Yeah. There's no but there. And I think Britain has concealed its crimes so beautifully. And also, anytime you criticize Britain, your sense of citizenship, your sense of belonging is challenged. I don't know if you saw the Afua Hirsch discussion on statues. She criticized our attachment to them. Yeah. Nick Ferraro said, well, if you don't like it, go back then. Yep. So that's also another thing that's been used.
If you criticize, you're not British, basically.
Yeah, so I think to answer your question more specifically, there's structural issues, there's historical revisionism, that's a huge thing, and that's empire, and that's actually a link between all the minority communities. Yeah. And then this kind of very British way of downplaying things and undermining things and saying, oh, that's an issue over there.
Yeah, when it's quite funny when you talk about structural and the police inside police. When again, this was 5 years ago, I'm hoping things have changed now. When we were there doing our research and being part of the gangs unit, part of it was you had to go out on calls with them just to see how they operated. And the research was based on stop and search. So that's our version of hands up, don't shoot. So, right. And it was the borough commander and some of the senior members of the Brixton Police, they didn't want us going out. Even though we've already signed our health and safety and we've already got our stab vest, they didn't want us going out. And the younger officers and the safer neighborhood teams, even the gangs unit, Trident, they were very enthusiastic to take us around and show us. But they didn't want us to because they didn't want us to see what we saw. But some of the officers are very cheeky. So what they did was, you know what, he's not here, I'm going to take you because I need to show you something. And it was their way of saying, look, this is how we are and we need help. And I saw firsthand arrests happening. And these are like black boys who are 11, 12-year-olds. Yeah. And there's the old big men. Yeah. It's so powerful, putting them on the floor and arresting, and it was just rough. And then then I also had conversations with these minority officers, and Black officers told us that they didn't feel comfortable hanging around with other Black officers because they felt like that they would get backlash if they do, or they'd be looked on differently. So they had to make sure they were never together. And there were the Asian officers who came up and said, our ideas are never taken into consideration. They're always dismissed. And the younger there was also a low division between young and old white officers, and they were the ones who were willing to take us around and show, look, we need help, and please put this in your research. And so I'm curious to know, like, I wish we had some police officers on here. I'm curious to know, in your opinion, do you think police officers see it as a race issue or police practice issue?
It's a great question. Look, I think, I always find it interesting when people try and abstract things like race and class, because they're fundamentally intertwined, right? Of course, it's a police practice issue, but again, like when Natalie was on the call and we were saying, when you're competing for two different issues, they're not mutually exclusive. It's not like, oh, I'm protesting for the annexation of Palestine, but I can't, against the annexation of Palestine, sorry, but I can't protest, for Black Lives Matter. And so, yes, it is a police practice issue. And I think many officers will probably view it within that lens. The problem, though, is, well, let's look at it from a police practice issue. And I'll direct people to check out Joe Rogan's podcast with a former Navy SEAL called Jocko Willink, right?
Yeah.
And watch the long form version, because the clips don't give you the nuance in what they're saying. It's very interesting. They were speaking about Derek Chauvin and how he had actually had many complaints against him and was involved in 2 shootings prior to George Floyd. And they're also explaining, the Navy SEAL was explaining from his military experience, when people are put in firefights or when they're put in certain situations, they change over time. So you vet someone mentally once, and I don't like using mental health a lot because I think it creates a stigma, but let's go with it. You vet someone, you make sure they're sound, and a firefight or an officer involved shooting changes their view. When you're being asked to police certain communities that are predominantly Black, and you're constantly arresting people for committing crimes in those communities, low-level offenses like, carrying some coke or some drugs, you over time develop those biases.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll speak to friends of mine, some of them who've served in the armed forces, some of them who've served, let's say, in the police, right? And they'll say, well, it's my experience. I know what I'm talking about. I'm like, fair enough. But the question is, are you policing equally? Because I've lost count of the number of times I've been to, let's say, a party, usually amongst other people who are like lawyers or whatever, predominantly white middle class, and someone will put some coke on the table. Now, if you have the level of confidence to be carrying, let's say, close to a kilo of coke, it's probably because you're
not going to get searched.
You're not going to get stopped. And you're not going to get searched. And even when you do, it's a slap on the wrist. Right? So we also know that if you're committing insider trading, or you're committing, crimes like that, it's viewed in a completely different way. Oh, this is sophistication. This is intelligence. This is, they're always one step ahead of the system. That's never the case. So that's class intertwined. So to answer your question, do police view it as a race or policing issue? It's hard to say. It will vary from officer to officer. I can understand why a police officer would say, no, this is purely a police practice issue, which is why people think, oh, let's just get in a bunch of Asians and a bunch of Blacks and a bunch of fill in the X to fix it. But you're operating within a system. And also people forget inequality is structural as well. So the legal system's one thing, But if you look at the States, you've got the Jim Crow laws, which entrench that inequality.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why the things are the way they are, and there's a reason why police, perfect example, let's look at Notting Hill Carnival. Everyone loves to talk about drugs at Notting Hill Carnival. Notting Hill Carnival is disproportionately policed. If anyone's been to Notting Hill Carnival, you can't imagine the amount of police. But then if anyone's been to Glastonbury, you will have seen heroin. You will have seen coke. You would have seen Ket.
And it's
an officer in sight.
and
How
it's
many
quite,
drug-related deaths are there in Glastonbury and no one talks about it?
and it's quite interesting because for Notting Hill Carnival, the police officers will be in riot gear, and I had this conversation with one of the police officers who were at Notting Hill, he's there every year, and he actually basically said, you don't need the riot gear for Notting Hill Carnival, but for some reason they're given it and he was saying how just wearing the normal uniform, it doesn't make you angry, but the minute you're in riot gear, for some reason you are angry and you are ready for war. And at a carnival such as Notting Hill, like any carnival in London, you don't need that gear because no one's rioting. It's just a festival.
No one's rioting. There's obviously and this also comes down to media and reporting, right? And we see how perpetrators of crime are racialized.
Yeah.
So let's take the Rotherham grooming gangs.
Yeah.
Racialized as Pakistani Muslim men, became an Asian issue, and it became a religious issue.
Yeah.
No one speaks about Ian Huntley and how he chopped and literally brutalized 2 girls. No one speaks about huge paedophile rings. People mention Jimmy Savile, but they don't mention his race.
No,
and they don't
they just,
the white problem.
Yeah.
Similar with terrorism. Is there, has there been links between certain scriptures in let's say, religious books like the Quran and terrorist attacks? Absolutely. People have taken things out of context. But then also, when you have someone like Anders Breivik that has an ideology of white nationalism and Nazism, and single-handedly kills almost 100 people, one of the biggest and most successful terrorist attacks, we don't call him a terrorist. He is a terrorist, and he has a manifesto that says he wants to spread terror.
Yeah.
But we call him a lone ranger. We call him a lone wolf. We call him troubled. So even in our dialogue of the way we discuss crime and who commits it, and I think that delves into something which is, we have to understand that crime and class and even race to some extent, these are all socially constructed things.
Yeah.
What we consider as a serious crime versus a not serious crime, who we decide to prosecute, when we decide to mention someone's race when they've been arrested and when we don't, is something we have to be really alive to. So yes, it's both. The short answer is it's both. It's a police practice issue. Police are funded well enough and prepared well enough. And when people talk about this, I just want to delve into this bit as well. I want to talk about defund the police for a second, because this has been a huge
God, yes. Yeah.
Right, so defund the police. And this is where I think, unfortunately, in the era of Trump and just generally, we've lost this concept of nuance. We take very polarized positions. It's either, completely dismantle the police force and never see them again and live in some utopia without police, or it's let's arm them to the teeth with riot gear, military gear, explosives, the whole works. As you saw in Ferguson, that didn't look like a police force, that looked like an army. It looked like a very militarized police force to me. So defund the police is effectively saying that, and look, I'm not speaking for the people of the movement, but it's saying we've been pouring money into people that are primarily enforcers of the law, okay? So the police force is primarily there to enforce the law and to stop crime, to arrest people, and that's their function of protecting people. Unfortunately, with the decimation of social services and all these other things,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's just background noise. If anyone wants to jump in, feel free. So unfortunately, with the kind of the decimation of youth clubs and all of these things, police are now being asked to do a role that's beyond their remit. It's beyond their training. They don't have expertise. Police can't be social workers. They can't be community officers, enforcers of crime, mental health they can't do all of it. It's too much to ask of a single police officer, especially with the limited training they're given. So people are asking the question, right, if cyclical violence is an issue, if broken homes are an issue, if drug abuse in the family is an issue, if domestic violence is an issue, if trauma passing down to children is an issue, if kids not feeling safe and therefore they have to join a gang, or if someone has an insecure immigration status and it is now vulnerable to be picked on as effectively a drug mule, trafficking drugs across the country, is an extra £200 million, for example, in policing the best use of that money?
Yeah.
Or do we spend money on things that actually heal communities?
That's quite interesting because, again, going back to Brixton, we were there at a time when one of the officers, he was an amazing officer. His name was Errol Patterson. He's now retired and runs his own hotel in Jamaica, living the life. He was the Black liaison officer, and when we were there, he was retiring. And I think I remember telling you this. And at his retirement party, everyone was supposed to go, and only one person from the senior team came to wish him luck, and no one else turned up. And there was no one in place to replace him either. They didn't care. And he actually ended his retirement speech saying, "They don't care about us, so we keep fighting." That's how we ended it.
It's unfortunate, but it's true.
Yeah. And I don't know if they've got one now, but when we left and the year after, when we asked, they still didn't have anyone in place for a liaison community officer because they didn't have the money. But that money was spent somewhere else.
That's the thing. I remember, what was it, New Labour 1997 landslide election, Tony Blair, whatever your politics are, they had this lovely quote, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, and it seemed to work, right? A little bit. But I think that's also an issue. And I think this extends beyond race and even beyond class, which is this concept of we're a bit confused about what our justice system is supposed to do.
Yeah.
So recently I was speaking to a woman that used to work in prisons for an extensive period of time as a case officer. And she was saying, if you think about it, we send people to jail really to protect wider society and stop them from committing crime in the community, right? But we dress it up as, oh, jail is to give people, prison is to give people, we have this deterrent system of consequences, and the very threat, the very fear of going to prison because you'll never be able to get a job and you'll never be able to reintegrate into society, that's supposed to stop you from committing a crime. When it doesn't, though, you have no recourse into society, and therefore you fall back into a habit of reoffending. Also, what's interesting, she said, the level of investment. If you look at the kids that end up in prisons, very predictively, a large portion of them are coming from low economic backgrounds. A large portion of them have something going on in the home, whether it's domestic abuse or drug abuse. And a large portion of them, they are expelled from school, or they're excluded from school. We've given up on children so early because they're disruptive. We just kick them out. I've got 30 kids, kick them out. Kids are getting expelled and excluded from school for relatively minor things. And one thing that infuriates me is people say, oh, okay, well, you kind of had one or two of those parts of the equation. How come you turned out okay? Or they'll point out to a study of some twins or something, and they'll be like, this kind of, again, this conservative mindset, pull yourself up from the bootstraps and work hard and don't make excuses. I am of that school of thought too, but the problem with that thinking, that individualist thinking, is you forget the small privileges that were given to you along the way.
Yeah.
You forget that, like for Carla example, I know I'm referencing him a lot, but he's got a great storyteller.
He's actually really great, yeah.
He's giving an example of how some people on the block said to him, you've got potential. I'm not going to allow you to move food, basically. I'm not going to allow you to deal drugs.
Yeah.
Focus on your education. Focus on schooling. His parents were very supportive of, or his mum mainly, was very supportive of that Pan-African Saturday school. So all these small things make a difference. And so we've got to realize and be more evidence-based in what works. There's no point just putting more police on the streets, more, because we still have that very Victorian mindset. And the woman that I've spoken to, the caseworker, she said something very revealing. She said, I don't think we want to rehabilitate people in prisons. I think we want them beaten down and punished. Yeah. And she said, people, and I said this to her, and she agreed. I said, do you feel that for politicians, any form of any form of penal reforms to our prison systems is a form of electoral suicide? She said, absolutely. She said, the problem is that the narrative is we send prison to punish people, to teach them a lesson so they don't do it again. We put them on the naughty step. But
and also, don't forget, our prisons are actually quietly being privatized as well.
There's a profit. And then, if you look at Amendment 13 as well, the exception for people that have been incarcerated, and then the link of cheap labor to create things to make them productive members of the economy, making products for private companies. So, I mean, I don't want to make it out like a conspiracy, but what I'm trying to say is, one thing that's important to view, if you don't want to have an emotional discussion of racism, just think about the structures that are in place.
Yeah.
And think about, there's always a group of people that are benefiting from the status quo.
Just before I move on to the last question, I want to ask, as a community, what actions are you going to take towards the Black Lives Matter movement, especially get more Sri Lankan people involved? Like, I'm curious to know what everyone here thinks on what we should be doing or what conversations we should be having. Anybody? Is that for everyone?
I think one of the really important ones is like having conversations at home. I know that's like probably been said, but I think like especially under making like having these conversations like with our parents or within within even our generation about like the ways that we perpetuate anti-Blackness within our communities is so important. And I think at least like I think total generalization right now, but I think as a community, I mean, as actually like as a society, but also like as a community, I think and I'll bring back as a society, like we're very ready to pull from Black culture and pick and choose what we want to engage with. So identifying those things is really important. The conversation, I think this has been a really interesting time where even for within my own household, like the conversation around, or what very unfortunate that the burden of like proving anti-Blackness in every place has fallen on the killability of Black people, and like so like the visual kind of like thing, but now making it such a huge part of the way that we can approach like with our siblings, with our parents and things like that. I think that's really important.
I completely agree. Like even just racism in general, in my household we haven't really had the discussion. Like I mean after this I asked my brother for the first time, have you ever encountered racism or have you been racially profiled? And he's 25 and I've known him my whole life. It's just like with you, I've known you for a very long time, but I never had this conversation with you. And just having those conversations, and even with this, like 5-6 years ago, my parents would have been like, don't go to this area because it's dangerous. Don't go to Brixton, don't do this. And they were trying to say, don't go to this area because it's Black and it's an aggressive area, even though when it's not. So it's taken a lot of years to break that notion down and just like tell them like everyone's equal. You need to treat them as human beings and not race. But those notions were been fed into us for generations. So definitely, like what Tony said, having that conversation at home is really important. That's like the start. Does anyone else have anything to add?
I agree with both of you guys. I think home is the first place we should start everything before we move forward trying to correct or fix the world. So yeah, educating, I think the younger generations, like, you know, I have 2 kids, so I constantly talk about it. It's a very open communication at home, just with anything, you know, and just being open about it. I think Savini, she had a great point. Definitely start at home, and that's the best way. And then being a good example to the community as well. So just getting friends and family involved is it's a big thing. It's pretty good.
Thanks, Chika, for that question. I'm glad you asked that. And just to round it up, racism, not just in the UK, like it's very messy and it happens a lot, micro level, and it's very systemic. Do you think, what I'm trying to ask is, how do you think we can change this? Is it just as easy as having a conversation? Or what do you, so like, I'm interested to know, like, how do you think we can change the narrative? And I would also like to know what you think a solution will be, like in your own personal opinion, like your own perspective.
I think, you know, it's interesting, some of the questions that have come out. I definitely agree with Savini, for example, that you need to start having these discussions. Where do I think things are heading? I'll be very honest, and maybe this is not the answer that people want to hear. I don't think that much will change in the next year, 2, 3, or 4. Yeah. I think what's funny is we're fighting to have the conversation. It took a while. It took a good 6 years, and still just to even say, oh, by the way, this thing, Black Lives Matter, that doesn't mean your lives don't matter too. It took a while, and then, you know, and people have been fighting for a very long time. And that's not to say that progress hasn't been made. Yeah. I think, you know, firstly, where do I see things heading? And this is the positive thing. And I think someone asked, or at least in the tech questions that you sent me, what's the difference between now? Is it social media or not social media? Yeah. I think that one of the key differences is, for the first time in a long time, you're getting a much wider group of people for the first time having that conversation. I've had many, many friends of mine that are white or even just other backgrounds saying, hey, kind of realized my parents are a little racist. Or in one case, someone said, a really good friend of mine, she said she wanted to come out to her parents. And what ended up destroying that confidence in being able to say, hey, mom, I'm lesbian, is that when they had the issue of race, then all of a sudden homophobic slurs started coming out. Yeah. And I think one thing is that I see a lot more uncomfortable conversations happening. I see a lot more self-discovery happening. I think a lot of people are going to start really auditing, especially during lockdown, by the way.
Yeah, COVID-19 has been a blessing in disguise in a way.
Right? So yeah. I mean, COVID-19 it really brought to the fore so many structural inequalities, health inequalities, but there's only so much Netflix you can watch, and there's only so many walks to the park that you can do, and video games that you can play, or whatever your way, or home workouts you can do, before someone brings up that topic and you're like, Jesus. And then someone in your house brings it up and you're like, oh my God, you can't run away from it. You have to confront that discomfort. So I think that's where I see things heading. I see people auditing their own views, their own history, their own relationships with their own race, their own experiences of microaggressions and otherwise. And so we're going to see a growing consciousness. In terms of solutions, that's very interesting. I've got some very academic answers, but then I've got some more radical and probably real answers too. The academic answers are going to be simple. They're going to be things like, as one poet said, I forgot his name now, I spoke to him on a call about Windrush. He said, we need to tear down the statues and the statutes, as in the legislation. So structural reform is a huge thing. We can't do what Baroness Amos wants, which is just more black faces in high places, as she likes to say. You need to have a serious look at the laws, how they're applied, the history behind those laws, because they're not an accident. You know, I think people think racism kind of stops at this kind of time of a couple of slave ships here and there, and someone rolling down the window and calling you a racial slur, or a bit of microaggressions at work. No, it's embedded into the fabric of our society. America have had that conversation a lot more publicly than the UK has. So I think that's an issue. I think there's a change of consciousness. You don't know what you don't know what you don't know. So there needs to be a way to facilitate that. We need to have a change in our curriculum. You know, why am I not learning about the history of Sri Lanka at school? You know, tutors are great, but I want to know about a bit about Sri Lankan history. And thankfully, some of my Sri Lankan friends have kind of given me a bit of a steer. And I'll admit, I haven't really done that much reading as much as I should have. But it's that kind of intellectual curiosity to know about the other side. We definitely need some training around unconscious bias. Training sounds like it's something you can unlearn. You can't. But when you're conscious of your bias, then you force yourself to re-examine things that you think you have control over. This is perfect in hiring processes. There's a great study. I forgot the name of it, but there's a musical college. I can't remember in which state in the US, and they had the best musicians attend this college. And you had a panel of men and women, but for some reason, the attendees were at the college were disproportionately male. And they said, well, we just classically trained, and we just focus on the music, and have female panel members. When they put a screen so you couldn't see what the person looked like, a bit like The Voice, if you've ever seen the program, the rate of attendees, female attendees, and admission for females shot up. So I think there's something about that too. So that's the structural piece. The second, I would say, is social consciousness. So this is what we're talking about now. Learning to have uncomfortable conversations. Learning to recognize your privilege and realize privilege doesn't mean you haven't had a hard life or you're not disadvantaged in some ways. Having the humility, the intellectual humility to say, yeah, I think I'm woke on these issues, but as I gave you an example, I'm really blind. Oh, I was really blind, and probably still have so much more learning to do around sexual harassment, things that disproportionately affect women, that men don't even register. They don't even feel. It's not even part of their natural experience, how to have those conversations in a safe and kind of sensitive way. And then there's also this anti-racism element. I think for too long, people are kind of saying, oh, well, I'm not racist. But your silence, your indifference is part of the problem. And that goes for every issue, not just race. The third one, which I said was a bit more radical, and I probably wouldn't say this, but I will say it anyway. And I think this is the harsh reality. It's community. I'm all about building bridges. I'm a huge believer in stories, which is why I started the podcast in the first place. I haven't really run with it that much, but I believe stories cut through statistics, they cut through statutes, they cut through the fog of kind of confusion and complexity that we have around all these issues. For example, when that small boy, Ilian Kurdi, washed up on the sea, that kind of, for a moment, changed the narrative around how we see refugees, how we see immigration, how we see policing our borders, because it became a very human issue. And I'm sure there are many examples like that in the Sri Lankan sort of struggle, right? The internal problems that Sri Lanka is having. And then just generally the discrimination that I'm guessing as Sri Lankans you face in different moments in your life. Now, when I say community, I'm going to focus on the Black community. And that is a tricky one, because what does being Black actually mean? We kind of try to dissect that, but it's complex. You might have seen Black Pound Day. So the idea of buying Black, the idea of only kind kind of shopping in black businesses.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. Right now, within government, I'm trying to create an informal network for black people where they can get mentoring and you meet other senior black people and so on. I think we're going to need to be so much more educated on our voting system. And we need to be active participants in our democracy. So voting and running for office too. And not just at the state level, like the higher state level, but I'm talking about local council.
Yeah.
Because that determines how your local services are run. So when I said it was a bit radical, I think what's probably like, if you want a real revolution in this, and I don't like thinking like this because it comes at the exclusion of other communities. But realistically, if black people are like, you know, fuck it, I'm not buying Nike, I'm not buying any of this shit. Yeah, and you do a Rosa Parks style movement, like fuck the buses, let's carpool, let's join. People start waking up.
Yep.
They start waking up, and you've seen it in the environmental movement, where people are like, oh, why did Michael Gove all of a sudden start talking about plastic straws? And it wasn't because, you know, he felt sorry for some video of a turtle. And why did Coca-Cola very slowly but say, oh, okay, we'll kind of embrace biodegradable bottles as a market incentive?
I mean, that's quite interesting because I think when we had this conversation, we talked about how, like, say CrossFit, for example, and now the NFL apologizing, it was because they were losing money.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's their profit motive. That's their interest. You know, people who are promoting Fair and Lovely, right? Now, if a lot of the black community and the Asian community who predominantly buy Fair and Lovely, right, or other whitening or bleaching products, say fuck that, then they have to rethink that business model. You know, and so I think there's something really about, and again, I'm very hesitant to say this, but I think people, unfortunately, I'll say this, watch Sitting in Limbo, which BBC drama. It's only a film, 80 minutes, and it covers kind of the experience of one Caribbean man in particular, but this happened to 850 people, of being wrongfully detained because he came from the Windrush generation and harassed, and, you know, basically said, you're not married, are your kids really yours? Do you really live in this house? Do you really attend all these schools? Having your whole life
lie, I didn't exist. Yeah.
Basically, and detained and brought back and all of that. Watch that. And at the end of it, I remember I watched that and I got my dad to watch and we spoke about it. And he said, he said, you know, some days I just think, fuck it, I'm just going back to Sudan. I'm going back home. And I think I speak to a lot of my Asian friends, they feel the same.
Yeah.
Like if we're honest, if a lot of Asian people, particularly South Asian, just left this country, it would be fucked.
Yeah.
And I don't like to think like that, but what I'm trying to say is, I think the black community can learn something from the Asian community in terms of investing in each other, in terms of lifting each other up. And I know these kind of play on certain stereotypes, so I'm careful not to make them. But if I look at my own part of London, which is like the more Wembley area, and I look at people, let's say predominantly like my Indian friends, right, and the Indian community within Wembley, they've done a phenomenal job at doing something which I think the black community quite hasn't.
Yeah.
It's not to say they don't buy Nike, and it's not to say that they don't have other interests and other diverse set of friends, but what they've done very well is they've promoted each other's businesses. They've built with each other, they shop with each other, they invest in one another, they kind of pass down shared experiences.
You can see that within law firms as well. Go to the Asian lawyer. Yeah.
So I think ultimately, if black people start doing that, and you're seeing it a little bit, people start paying attention. It makes
yeah. Sorry, you were saying?
No, that's it. Yeah. So yeah.
Just before I let everyone go, I just want to say like a huge thank you to Mo for joining in and having the discussion, and even Natalie, even though she's offline now. Like, thank you so much. And I hope that you guys on this discussion took away from something. And certainly as part of SLYO, we definitely got a lot of ideas and lessons that we need to take on board and have further discussions. So thank you so much, Mo, for doing this. And thank you so much for you guys for joining in. And I know, especially for the LA guys, it's too early for you guys. But thank you so much for joining in. And I hope you'll be able to go back to sleep after this. And next week, we're actually having a discussion on colorism. So that'll be our second segment on Voice It with SLYO. I hope you guys join again. And I really hope Natalie joins again for that one.
Yes.
So thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. And thanks.
One more thing before you
Yep,
all.
go on.
I just want to thank you and everyone else that's been involved, either on this call or off the call, because quite frankly, I've just had to attend. You've created the posters, you've thought of the questions, you've framed it, you've thought about it, you've thought about all the details. I might have reviewed one or two things. I haven't done much, but I also want to say to the kind of Sri Lankan community and the people on this call, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And I'm gonna go on a journey to learn more about Sri Lanka and the different issues. So I'm a bit familiar on the kind of the arguments from my friends who are Tamil, for example. But if there's any resources or history or connections, I'm open to learning too. So I know the focus of this was Black Lives Matter, but I guess what I also want to say is part of my education in understanding other people's struggles and seeing where the connection points are is kind of learning about other people's histories. Because in some ways the two are interconnected. You might not see that connection,
But it's there.
It's there. So if anyone has any book recommendations or ideas, it'll obviously take me time, but I'm willing to learn too while I'm making a noise about Black Lives Matter. So thank you for your time and attention.
I also want you guys to follow him on Instagram and his podcast and blog as well. It's phenomenal. So I hope you guys do that. Aruni, do you want to add some last words or?
Oh my God, this was amazing, Sashini, and thank you for putting this whole thing, taking lead on running it. You did an absolutely amazing job. Thank you. I learned so much too. And Mo and Natalie, please tell her that I say thank you so much. And yeah, you're welcome to go to Sri Lanka anytime. You can let us know and we'll definitely take you and teach you some beautiful history about Sri Lanka. So, and we love to see you again with SLYO, things that we do. Please be a part of it. So you're a great guy. Thank you. And everyone too. Thank you so much.
For those of you joining late, don't worry, this is recorded, so it will be going up on our social media sites so you can catch up. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to send us those questions, and I'm sure Mo will be up for discussing them again. And yeah, so thank you so much, guys. So I hope you guys have a lovely weekend and have fun. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.